about we will learn about the topic of Shabbat, what's allowed to do in Shabbat, and the different, also more complicated questions around that. And what we will do today is to speak about the topic that is in a way in the side of Shabbat, but is very relevant in the experience of the Shabbat. That is called Shabbos Goy, or Goy Shel Shabbat in Hebrew. If any one of you have heard about the topic and can explain what you know about it. It's something that also has a lot of cultural things around that have developed, and we will try to go to the depth of, or the frame of what that means actually, if it's okay or if it's not okay, or when it's okay. But just before, what does Shabbos Goy mean?
I think it means someone who is not Jewish that could be used for doing things that is for a Jewish sake. For example, turn the light on or something in the synagogue, where the use are forbidden.
Yes, Michael, do you want to add?
Hi. The little I know about it is, yes, it's that the same that Lash said, but you are not allowed to ask him directly to the help. You have to understand by himself that you need the help, maybe.
Okay, so you referred to two things that are maybe the two most known things. Very good that you say. Shabbos Goy, in that understanding, means someone who isn't Jew, who will then do things that are forbidden on Shabbat for a Jew. That is forbidden to do them on Shabbat. And then Michael added on that, saying, but also, I know that you're not allowed to tell him. So you have to hint. There is kind of the way you allow to say it to a non-Jew. And it's a question of how should you say it, so it will be allowed on Shabbat. Anyone who wants to add anything, we will go to the details, so you don't have to. But if anyone, or I will, yes, Rav Moshe David want to add, or wasn't that hand up?
Yeah, yes. I just wanted to say that sometimes it could create misunderstanding, or that it be something derogatory. That, oh well, that the goy, in other words, even using the use of this word goy is sometimes can be insensitive, or sometimes we can hear it in that way. In other words, you're better, you're keeping the Shabbat, and I will do something for you, sort of at a lower level. So it's very, the term itself, you said cultural, but I also think it could also mean or be misunderstood sometimes.
Yeah, so it could be misunderstood by us needing to keep the Shabbat and not understanding the frame of it, and we'll speak about that, and we'll speak about that. But as you say, it's also a very sensitive thing to do, because you tell someone who isn't a Jew that they do something that you're not allowed to do, and I can't do it, but you can do it. And some can think, okay, that's a good practical thing, I will help, why not? But some people, and I have met many of them, I have to say, that could get insulted, saying, okay, you're holy, you keep your Shabbat, and I can do the stuff for you. And that could be very insulting in the relationship between us and our neighbors or our friends. And it's important to refer to that also. Rebecca, did you want to say something? That's either a yes or a no. Okay, if you want, just yeah.
No, I was going to say, I might be wrong, but I think I read somewhere that you can because back in the day, people had a Shabbos goy, so it's pre-arranged what a Shabbos goy could do on Shabbat. Or am I mistaken?
Yeah, there is a situation of Shabbos goy, and that's a important thing to say, that often are rearranged, saying you come tomorrow on this and this time, and then you do it. And then you don't tell them on Shabbat to do the things, but you arrange from before Shabbat that they will do something on Shabbat that is permitted. Today, in many religious neighborhoods, there is a person that has a mission called Shabbos Goy. And he is going around, he knows all the rules. I will speak about the rules later. And there is how much he will be got paid for after Shabbat for things to do. He knows when he comes to a home and someone tells them, oh, do you want something from the refrigerator? Then it means that you have to turn off the light on the refrigerator. Or if they say, oh, it's so cold here, then he understands that he has to heat up, or other things. And especially if someone is sick, then he also has a car and he takes them to the hospital, and so on. So there are many things this kind of Shabbos goy know what to do. And he works, and he's always at work. And you speak, Rebecca, about people who were living in the house of Jews. It could be someone that helps his household or other things. And then they maybe do things that Jews are not allowed to do on Shabbat. Before I go, and we will learn, go through the different things, what do you think about the idea of someone who isn't Jew that breaks the rules for Shabbat? He is not obligated, that's very important to say, but breaks the rule of Shabbat on behalf of the Jew. What do you think about the idea of it? Are you in favor? It's a good solution, a bad solution? Yes, Monica or Kato?
I have a little problem with this idea, because I thought it was the intention of what you do or what you want somebody to do. And if the intention is that I want the light to go off and on, what does it matter if I hint to someone else to make this happen? Doesn't God know anyway that this was my wish, this was my intention? I'm just playing some kind of game.
So you say you want something to happen, you're not allowed to do it yourself, you hint and you get the result. And that's a kind of fooling the rules, way of fooling the rules. Yes? Good?
It could also be if depending on at what level you see the Shabbos, but if you see the Shabbat as something where you don't want to create any, you don't take away the creation moment, and also to rest and to be with Hashem, it could be even more take more of your energy to actually have that lamp not being turned out from the refrigerator than if you just go to someone else or the solution to actually use someone else it feels like a kind of moment that would be in some way could be not Shabbat in the Shabbat in the sense of the Shabbat, or in the what do you say, you understand what I mean. It could take more energy than
But then I will add what Monica said, and says, okay, so do it yourself. Do it yourself, and you have more. If that's okay, it's not okay to turn off the light on the refrigerator Shabbat, but the whole idea of doing it by someone else, that's cheating. So okay, if the situation is that it's more stress not to solve the problem than solving the problem, solve the problem, but why do it by someone else?
Or accept the rules and make it more practical the next time. Yes,
you learn from it to be more. If you could solve the problems, I'll add, then you will maybe not prepare yourself for Shabbat, because if there's a problem, I'll go to a goy, he'll solve the problem for me. Where is the preparation for Shabbat that then ends in a real full Shabbat experience. Eva or Micha, did you want to say something?
Yes, I think that maybe back in the time there were bigger problems. Today we have very comfortable life, so it doesn't matter if you will not freeze to death or something like that. But before, if you forget something, maybe it's a big consequence, and if it's important enough, then it's okay. But if you misuse it just for comfortable thing, I don't think it's okay.
So, according to what you say, it should have been the situation that in all days they were using Shabbos Goy more than today, because then things couldn't be solved. The people didn't live in houses as we could build today, and freezing could be freezing to death. And today it's I want another light. I want you could. And I have to say, I think that we use Shabbos Goy today more than we used before, but that's maybe when we go back to thinking about the idea of what is it good or bad? Should we or shouldn't we use Shabbos Goy? And we'll go into the details soon. Yes, Katu or Monica?
Yeah, following Michael, it's the same. One example I read about is that they've used Shabbos Goy to warm up the synagogue in cold areas, maybe because they were not able to enjoy the Shabbos and be able to keep the good spirits through the Shabbos with the freezing cold synagogue. So that is one example I read about.
Yeah, we had a Bet Midrash in Oslo with a freezing synagogue some weeks ago. Rav Moshe David also was there. And we didn't ask anyone to heat up, but it wasn't freezing minus degrees yet.
But if it's so cold that the life is on stake, then it's probably okay to break the Shabbat in order to save lives, right?
Yes, of course, we'll come to that. Okay, Rav Moshe David?
I just wanted to say that if you ask your father, he might not agree with you that it wasn't freezing at that Shabbat in Oslo. If you're in a situation, or just to add to the complexity, okay, what if it's not life endangering, but what if no one's going to come to the synagogue, for example, because it's so freezing? So, it's not like I'm telling people to drive on Shabbat to the synagogue. Here I'm finding another solution, but again, it's not, people can keep their babies at home, which I'm sure you're going to speak about, but then, right, that's it adds complexity to when should we actually say yes, because it's not comfortable that Shabbat for sure. To have people in their coats the entire Shabbat and warming their hands, and elderly people in that situation, and they are your minyan. I'm not sure that we're talking about old times and new times, but here is a good example of something just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and actually, one thing is the long-term effect things could have. But also, as you said, my father actually got sick after, and he says it's because of the synagogue on Shabbat. I don't know if he's right or not, but if I believe him, he says that's the reason. And then we are speaking about people being sick, and if people are elderly or other and they get sick, then it could actually have danger for life to go to a place that is too cold. Also in our days. Okay, the frame is as following of Shabbat. It's a weird thing because there's a lot of things we will speak here. It's allowed in this way. Here it's allowed in this way. Here it's allowed in this way. But it's important to know and understand that the basic of the question, is it allowed to use a non-Jew for things for our needs on Shabbat? The answer is no, not allowed. And I'll speak soon why it's not allowed. And in addition, if the question is, and there you have, we already spoken about, is it allowed to tell a non-Jew to do something that is forbidden on Shabbat for you, then the answer is no also. So in that way, we have two things that are not allowed on Shabbat as a principle. And then we'll have, fortunately or unfortunately, you can have your opinion, but then we'll have, okay, but when is it allowed? But the principle is, if a non-Jew does a melacha, a forbidden work on Shabbat for a Jew, you're not allowed to enjoy it. It's called hana'ami ma'aseh goy. You're not allowed to enjoy it. And in addition, there is some place where it's even more strict than if a Jew does break the rules. If a Jew breaks the rules on Shabbat, not if he does it for you, but if he does it, you're allowed to eat from that after Shabbat, saying someone brings something that they're not allowed to bring from one place to another, and you come after Shabbat, then when Shabbat is, you're not allowed to enjoy, of course, a Jew breaking the rules on Shabbat, and there is things that you're not allowed to enjoy at all, but the principle is, in many cases, that after Shabbat, you're allowed to eat from it. It's a chocolate he took from another place, not allowed to take it or bring it in the car, to take it out in the, what you learned last week, to bear it out of the private area and so on. I can't eat that chocolate on Shabbat because it's breaking the rules. Shabbat finish, I can eat it. When a non-Jew does it, I have to wait after Shabbat the time it takes to do it. Okay? So it's so strict that if I, now a non-Jew brings me something that it takes 2 hours to bring to my home, I am not allowed after Shabbat to eat from it. I have to wait the 2 hours it will take to do it, and only then I can eat. And the reason for that is, maybe you understand, because we could say, okay, we're not allowed to enjoy what a non-Jew does on Shabbat, but we can tell them to do it on Shabbat, and then directly after Shabbat, we will enjoy it because they're not Jewish. And then they can do things for us on Shabbat, and after Shabbat, we will have what we need. And to like a gzerah, so that we won't do this, they say, okay, but you have to wait after Shabbat the time it takes. And this kind of gzerah was not put on that we'll tell Jews to do things on Shabbat, because that's not reasonable, that someone who keeps the Shabbat will go to another Jew telling him to do the work to break the rules, because all Jews are obligated to keep the Shabbat. And there is but I just take this example to show that enjoying something a non-Jew does for a Jew on Shabbat is forbidden. And the main source for this, I'll go through several sources. The main source for this, we could find from the Torah. It's a Mechilta that learns from the Torah. Here, Uvayom harishon mikakodesh. No, sorry. I went too far. No, I opened wrongly. No, it was correct. Here. I have problems with my mouse. Here. Okay, it says here, it says about Pesach, but it says you're not allowed to do any work. And it says, Kol melacha lo ye'aseh. No work shall be done on them. Okay? And we learned that for all the places where we're not allowed to do work. And it doesn't say you shouldn't do any work, but it says no work shall be done. Okay? And this is very similar to what Monica said earlier, that the Mechilta learns from this the Midrash that it doesn't say you shouldn't do any work, but it says that no work should be done. So the idea isn't only that you shouldn't do a work, but you shouldn't do a work. And it says, Lo ta'aseh ata, you shouldn't do. Velo ya'aseh chavercha, and your friends shouldn't do. Velo ya'aseh goy melachtecha, and a goy, a non-Jew, shouldn't either do your work. Okay, and here we have to split to two things. One thing is that a non-Jew is not obligated to keep the Shabbat and is allowed by the law of Torah to do what he wants, and it's no problem. There isn't anything wrong with a non-Jew doing his own work on Shabbat. He's not obligated to keep the Shabbat. And by that, that's totally okay. That's really okay. What happens when the non-Jew does the work for a Jew on Shabbat? According to this mechilta, to this learning in the text, because it says no work should be done, then it's not allowed for a non-Jew to do work on behalf of a Jew. So if he turns on the light in his own home, that's perfect, no problem. If he turns up the light in the home of a Jew, oh, he does it for the Jew. And if he does it for the Jew, it's the work of the Jew, and that is forbidden. Not forbidden for him to do, but forbidden to ask, for us to ask and to enjoy. Okay? And if we can't ask and we can't enjoy what he does, then there's no meaning in doing it or asking him to do it. And the Gemara also in the Talmud, there is different, really, they go into details on what does that mean when a non-Jew builds a bridge on a river, okay, on Shabbat. Does he do it for himself or does he do it for the Jews that live in his village? And there, the result is if most of the people living there are Jewish, then he builds it for Jews, and Jews are not allowed to go on that bridge until after Shabbat, and as we said, until after the time it takes to build a bridge after Shabbat. Because he builds it for not only for himself, but for all the people who could use the bridge over that river. If most of the people who live in that village are not Jewish, then you're allowed to use that bridge on Shabbat, because he doesn't build it for you, he builds it for the majority of the people, and then you're allowed to build it. And that's kind of, and another question is, if he knows you, if he's your best friend, and you live as a neighbor for him, then he also builds it for you, and then you're not allowed to use it. So it's very clear from, and there are several other examples also, but what we can see here, that the examples go on what is, it does the non-Jew do the melacha of the Jew or the melacha of himself? The melacha of himself, it's okay. The melacha of the Jew is not, it's not allowed to enjoy. Yes, Lars.
So if a Jewish person lives, let's say, within the roof, but long distance from the synagogue, and then when he walks to the synagogue, there is a bus that stays and open the doors, but not for him, but for other not Jewish people. Is he allowed to, if it just brings him a little bit closer to the synagogue, to just step on and then step off, because this was not made for him? And
so by the way, we'll come later because I want to use all the elements, but let's use your example, okay? By principle, if he goes on the bus that opens the door not for him, or let's say a metro, that's better, okay? A metro opens the door in every station, because on the bus there are other elements, like you want to go off the bus and he sees that you want to go off the bus, and then he'll stop in your station, and maybe if you won't be there, he won't stop at that station. The metro stops in all stations. And then you go on the metro, you go off the metro, you don't do anything. There is some elements that are problematic here you have to take in concern, paying, okay, or bearing the ticket you buy in advance, how you can take that. That's problematic. But by the principle, the metro doesn't go for the Jews. It goes for the majority of people that are not Jew, and by that, it could be, I'll go back to details later, it could be only if you only see that, don't take that as an answer, but if we don't only check the element of a non-Jew driving a bus or a metro or a T-Bahn, as we call it in Oslo, to go on and off, he doesn't do it for you. And that's a correct understanding of the problem of a non-Jew working for himself or for the majority that aren't Jew, and a Jew enjoys it. And if that same situation would be in Tel Aviv, that will be forbidden. Because in Tel Aviv, most of the people are Jewish, and you can't then have public transportation when it comes to this. There are problems with it, and in the end, it's not allowed by principle to use the metro on Shabbat. It's not as problematic in some ways, but it's not allowed, and we'll come to that. Okay. That's one of the explanations for why it's not allowed to ask a non-Jew to do your work on Shabbat and to enjoy what a non-Jew does in your behalf on Shabbat. Other explanations, I'll take, there are three more explanations I want to share. One of them, I didn't find it in the sages. Where have it here? A moment. I thought I opened it before. If we sorry, I opened the PDF and it was closed, so I have to find it. Here we have this is from the sages, the halakha part that we also sent you, and here it speaks about rules that are not exactly from the Torah, but are other rules that are very important to understand in the frame of the Shabbat. And it's based on a sentence for Isaiah, speaking about the Shabbat. If you retain your working because of the Shabbat, pursuing your needs on the day of my holiness, and you call the Shabbat a delight and the Lord's sacred, honored, and you will honor it by refraining from doing your business, from speaking your needs, and from speaking your matters. Okay, this is the translation, and here there is the sentence from speaking of matters, seeking your. I read wrongly. Seeking your needs and from speaking your matters. In Hebrew, it's called daber davar. Okay, and based on this, we learn that you're not allowed. One thing is breaking the rules. That's one thing. But another thing is you're not allowed to speak on Shabbat in the same way you speak on other days. Even if you don't break the rules, there has to be another atmosphere for Shabbat. And then based on that, Rashi in the Talmud says that one of the things you're not allowed to do is to say to a non-Jew to do work on Shabbat, because this is speaking about your needs. And you're not allowed to speak about your needs. You're not allowed to speak about the working things that are forbidden on Shabbat. So even the saying of the melacha of could you cook the food for me? Could you heat up or burn more the fire so that it will be more hot here? You are speaking about the things that are not allowed on Shabbat on a practical way, meaning things we should do now. And this is breaking the atmosphere of Shabbat. And that's not allowed either. So this is a second problem with one thing is that you're not allowed to enjoy what a non-Jew does on Shabbat and to ask him to do it. Rashi, based on this sentence, says you're even not allowed to speak about the doing that is not allowed on Shabbat. You shouldn't speak about it. It's breaking the atmosphere on Shabbat. You shouldn't actually say things about what you'll do on Sunday either. You're allowed to say, I want on Sunday, I would want to have a nice day. But you're not allowed to say, you shouldn't actually say we will drive and how we'll do things that are breaking the Shabbat rules, even if we're speaking about Sunday, because the Shabbat should be a day where you experience the Shabbat and not the Sunday or the Monday after, and especially not speaking. One thing is that we will go to a trip on Monday, it will be nice. But speaking about the things we will do that are melachot on Shabbat, you shouldn't say. That's another. Rashi, another place, also compares a non-Jew that does a thing that is forbidden on Shabbat to a shaliach. Okay, shaliach is someone who does something in your behalf, meaning that if I ask a non-Jew to break the rules of Shabbat for me today, he is my shaliach. He's my how do you say it in English? In Norwegian we say tilsendt. I have sent him. He's my arm in a way, and then it is if I do it myself. Also a little similar to what Monica said before, but from another angle. Okay, you make things happen on Shabbat. It's your hand that does it, and because of that, you're not allowed to send a non-Jew on Shabbat to break the rules. Not allowed, even if he, for his own issues, is allowed to, he doesn't have any Shabbat. It's not relevant for him, but for you it is, and you ask him to do it, and he does it for you, then it's not allowed also. And a last explanation for why this isn't allowed is from Rambam, that says that if you will be allowed to use a non-Jew on Shabbat, let's say that all the other problems we said until now are okay, there's no problem. It will change the whole atmosphere of Shabbat if it will make Shabbat unimportant for us. As we said in the start, we said, okay, if I'm allowed to do everything I want, but just ask the non-Jew that lives in my home or my neighbor to do it, then it will turn the Shabbat to be it's not a day you're not allowed to do work, it's a day you're allowed to do work by a non-Jew. And that's not the idea of the Shabbat, as we saw already from the start, from the Mechilta. Your work shouldn't be done on Shabbat. The principle is that from before Shabbat, you make all the things prepared so that Shabbat will be a day without any work. And your work shouldn't be done. Not by you, as we saw in the Mechilta, not by your friend, and even not by someone that isn't Jew. This is the principle of what we allowed. So now I have spoken a lot and explained why the whole idea of a Shabbos Goy is forbidden. Okay, so I hope I was good in explaining why it's not allowed. But now the question would be, okay, how do we have that element called Shabbos Goy at all? And here it's important to say that even if by principle it is not allowed, there are many untag, how do you say it in English?
Exceptions.
Exceptions, thank you. I had many exceptions. And the exceptions are in things where that is especially needed. Meaning, I'm not allowed to ask an anju to do a help for me just because I want. But in several situations, it's allowed by principle already to say, but in these situations, even if it's by principle isn't allowed, it should be allowed. Okay? The most common and known and maybe also important issue is sickness. Sickness is, maybe it's also said already in the Gemara. It's if in issue of sickness, it's allowed. And I by purpose say sickness and not danger for life, because danger for life, you shouldn't use the time to go to an anju that will do it instead of you. You do it yourself. If there's danger for life, we'll learn about that. I think if we haven't learned about it, maybe already next week, that in danger for life, there's no Shabbat, or we're allowed to break the Shabbat rules. It's a philosophical question. Is it that the Shabbat is allowed to be broken, or you don't break the Shabbat rules because it's allowed on Shabbat to save life? But there are situations where we call it, there is a difference in Hebrew between something that is called chole sheyesh bo sakana, a sickness with a danger for life, and chole she'en bo sakana, and a sickness without danger for life. Someone who has fever, we don't see that as a crisis for life. You lie in your bed. Someone that is elderly, but in some ages, you come to a situation that your life is in danger all the time because, but someone that we don't see as if they are sick with a directly danger for life, but we see them as sick people. The Talmud says in this situation, you're allowed to ask a non-Jew to help them. Okay, you didn't have enough food or something turned down, and they need hot meal, a hot soup. Okay, so someone that is sick without the danger for life, you could also, when someone is sick with a danger for life, to use an anju. Okay, so for example, if someone needs to give birth, you could drive yourself, it's allowed, but you could also take a taxi with a non-Jewish driver, and that's also allowed. And if it's as easy to do that, then do the same. Maybe it's better to do the non-Jew. But even in a sickness that is less danger for life, in birth, it's a danger for life. I think Michael said before that it's a difference between old days and today. Also there is a difference, but the difference is because we have the health understanding and systems that makes birth less danger for life today than it was before. That means that going to the hospital when you give birth is danger for life, as an example. But even in other things, it's allowed. And then we add another principle that we already spoke about today, that the Gemara says that when it comes to be cold, okay, when it's very, very cold, then everyone could be sick. Kulam cholim etzel tzina, it says. Meaning that in your home, if you have the fire, and today we don't need fire to heat our homes. Many go back to that because of the price of the electricity, but that's a question of price. But we don't need the fire because we have the electricity that works. And based on that work of the electricity, we allowed to, we can heat our homes without we have to make any change in Shabbat. But if we live in Norway and we have a Shabbat, or in another place in the Nordic countries, and it's minus 10 degrees outside, and we fill up the oven before Shabbat, if we don't only have like the old-fashioned ways of filling it up, and either it burns out after 4 or 5 hours, and then it's cold, and maybe some hours it's still warm because of the oven, but in the morning you're freezing. Or if it's for one or another reason the fire falls down, and you can't live in your home freezing because it will make you sick. So the Gemara itself says that means that everyone in that home are seen as sick. You're not allowed to fire up yourself. It's not a direct danger for life. but you're allowed to ask a non-Jew to fire up your fire, because this is a situation of danger, of sickness. And in the same way, if there are things that are in a great loose, okay, something that I forgot the door open in my business, and everything could fall out and be, and closing the door is by electricity, okay, I will lose 200,000 crowns on that Shabbat if I don't close that door. Am I allowed to close that door on Shabbat? No, I'm not allowed. If it's breaking the rules, I'm not allowed. Losing money is not a reason to break the Shabbat rules. But the Talmud already said that it's allowed to hint a non-Jew to close the door for you, because there is a great loss. So especially these two issues, if there's a great loss or a great issue where the consequences are more than it's a little more convenient for me, or if there is a sickness, even if it's not sickness with danger, and as I said, heating is included in that, then you're allowed to hint a non-Jew and to enjoy the heat from, or the consequences from a non-Jew doing that, because they are doing it for those who are sick. And in this, it's important to say, the elderly people are, of course, included, meaning if, for example, if I as a rabbi follow the rules, and we have an old age home and we have the community house, the rules in the old age home and in the community house are very different, because in the old age home, everyone is sick, even with danger for life, I have to say, especially in for some of them. But it's totally different, and that's allowed. Why in the community home we have to have a situation for that to be allowed. When that is said, I'll do things even more complicated. There are many things in the gray zone, okay? Gray zone that is not, let's say it's really, really hot. It doesn't happen very often in Scandinavia or in the Nordic countries. Very, very hot, and I need air conditioning, okay? You don't become sick very often from not having the air condition, but people who are used to have air condition and it's 42 degrees outside, they will suffer the whole Shabbat. The whole Shabbat will be a suffering for them, okay? Or all the food is in the refrigerator and we forgot the light on. We prepared the food for Shabbat. We have 15 guests coming tomorrow, and we don't have any way to come to the food because we're not allowed to open the door. It's not one of these two cases I said before, but it has elements of mitzvah. It has elements of a loss for the Shabbat. I will add on, Rav Moshe David spoke about children. I want to go to the synagogue. I want my children to come with me. I have a baby. I'm not allowed to take that baby out in the street. Am I allowed to ask a non-Jew to take the baby for me, to come to synagogue? Here we have a mitzvah to come to synagogue. We have a baby in a situation. It's not maybe not good to the baby to stay home every Shabbat all the day. Maybe it's good for the baby to go out, if I will add that. It's about the whole experience of my family be able to come to synagogue. In these kind of cases, according to where, in these kind of cases, by principle, they're in the gray zone, but they're more not allowed to break the Shabbat rules for them. It's important to say, not allowed to break the Shabbat rule for them by a non-Jew. Rav Moshe David, yes.
Another, just to add on, is, and why I think one of the, in the Halakha book, it says that these cases you need to ask the rabbi, because in order to find there's a big difference in which melacha is actually what level. I'm going
there. That's where I'm targeting. So I'll explain.
Okay, so I'll let you continue on.
Yeah. In these gray zone situation of mitzvah or a big impact on the Shabbat, or while we said children or things like that, it's forbidden to ask a non-Jew to break the Shabbat rules for you. But it's only forbidden to ask a non-Jew to break a Shabbat rule from the Torah from you. Okay? And here it's very important to understand and to follow these studies will help, but we don't go into all these details. Many rules, there's a difference that we divide the whole, in a way, all the halacha mainly to two things. There are more than two, but mainly two things. One is what we call the oraita. The Torah says it's not allowed to do so and so. And the second one is the rabbanan from the rabbis. Okay? So there are things that are not allowed to do from the Torah. I'll give an example. There are things that the Torah says you're not allowed to break down a house, okay? But we learned that the only reason you're not allowed to break down is not building, it's breaking down. But the only reason from the Torah that it's not allowed is if you break down to build on. Okay, because ruining things is okay, building things is not okay. Okay, we have the same in writing. If you write, if you viskir, how do you say that? Take off.
Erase.
Yes, erase. So if you do that, you are ruining something that was written. That's not forbidden from the Torah. But if you do it to have a place to write something else, then you're building something. And that's, so sometimes the difference between something that is forbidden to do or forbidden from the Torah is very, very small. Sometimes the difference will be in the way you do it, okay? Because we learned that we are only allowed, forbidden to do the things that are not allowed from the Torah in the normal way. But doing them in a non-normal way, it's not allowed from the rabbis, but it's allowed from the Torah in the way we learn it. Because of that, there's several people who turn up the light, but do it with the back of your hand. Okay, that's not the normal way of doing it. It's forbidden. It's not don't go around and do everything like this on Shabbat. It's still forbidden in the frame of the Shabbat. It doesn't help a lot, anything. In taking it from being allowed and not allowed to allowed. It does change it from being not allowed from the Torah to be only not allowed from the rabbis, Rabbanan, okay, as we call it. And because of that, that's what Rav Moshe David tried to if I understand correctly, asking a non-Jew to do in the gray zone things that not allowed from the Torah, that's forbidden. But asking a non-Jew to do things that not allowed from the rabbis, not in anything, not everything I want, but the things that has a meaning. If you have guests and it's a big embarrassing to have them and not giving them food. If you have children that have to experience a Shabbat and they don't have any food. If you want to come to synagogue with a baby, exactly what is a big discussion. I want to learn the principle here. But the principle is in these gray zone areas, it's allowed to ask a non-Jew to not ask, to hint a non-Jew, we speak also, we don't say the words, to hint a non-Jew to help you, or to ask him before Shabbat, and then you don't do it on Shabbat. You ask a non-Jew that is a good friend, could you help me with the baby, just these 200 meters on Shabbat so that we can come to synagogue? That is allowed to do because there is a mitzvah, and because only if what the non-Jew does is not breaking the rules from the Torah, but also only breaking the rules from the rabbis. Yes. Just
to use the previous shiurim to explain like what you're saying, Rav Yoav. If we remember from the beginning when we were learning the 39 melachot, we also explained that today in the modern world, we actually many of the things that we do are not exactly the melachot as they were done in nature. In other words, we gave the example, if you're a Shabbat in nature, you'll be much more closer to the actual melachot than we are today living. being that the fact that many of the reality that we live in today, we'll talk about electricity later on in the shiurim, but according to most opinions, electricity, you're not actually lighting a fire. So therefore, no one is going to say you can use electricity on Shabbat and turn on the light. But when we have a very good reason and we need to, for example, the refrigerator that Rav Joav gave, all your food is stuck. So no, we cannot violate the Shabbat, but we have to go through the process. And the process would be, well, electricity is not the Oraita, it's not from the Torah, it is the Rabbanan. I have a very specific need. Therefore, I can in this specific case, find a way either to say it or hint to the goy to open the refrigerator for me. So what we were learning last week about the Eruv today, in most cases, is not the Oraita. It's not the same circumstances that were in the Mishkan. And therefore, no one is saying you can carry, like someone asked last week, can I carry my Sidur? No, you cannot. But if you have a baby and that's going to stop you from being in the entire service, and that you understand that it's not deoraita, and therefore what you're asking, so I think that's, I'm just complimenting at what, not arguing or disagreeing, I'm complimenting from previous shiurim to understand the concepts of how things end up permissible through saying to or hinting to the God.
The problem here, and the good thing here is to know the difference. You could do two things. One is to ask the rabbi, but sometimes in a situation, you don't have a rabbi beside you. So the best thing to do is actually to learn the rules of the Shabbat to the details, and then you know the difference. Yes, Lars.
I thought about if one has forgot to make the toilet paper into small pieces. That's I don't know the word, but to rip, or what do you call it when you that's that's forbidden by the Torah, right? To the but if you destroy the toilet paper, tear it apart or destroy it, and the result being small pieces, is it possible to ask a goy to kind of destroy it if you forgot?
You have a very good case. I'll take your case. Okay, the idea of not allowing to build something but allowing to destroying, but comes from what you say. You're allowed to open a package to destroy it if that's for the food inside, as you I think learned here some weeks ago. But you're not allowed to pair toilet paper because you make what you want. You're building. You're not pairing. You're building what you want to use. And there is a principle I didn't speak about light. Okay, and I think the toilet paper is a little similar to the light in that way. The light, the Torah says that if there is a little light, it's enough as if you have a lot of light. So meaning that in the light there is a little opening that I didn't speak about today because we won't go through all the details, saying that if it's totally dark, you're not allowed to ask an anju to light for you. But if you have a little light, and nowadays we always have a little light, or almost always have a little light, then it's only adding for the light. Okay, and then you actually had light from before. It doesn't change the situation what an anju does, and because of that, you're allowed to enjoy when he turns on the light, even if he does it for you. If you're allowed to ask him or not, another question. Sometimes maybe you're allowed, okay? But because you already had light before, it's not totally correct, because if it's not enough light for me to read the book, then I wouldn't be allowed to enjoy the light to read the book, even if now it's more light. But enjoying the light by having an environment in my house where I see the people I sit around the table with, then if there was a little light from before, I'm allowed to enjoy the more light, okay? Even more, there is a question if what the non-Jew did is enough to change the status for you, okay? And I come with a very funny example from the Talmud. I don't remember exactly where it was, but I remember it well. The Talmud asked, when a non-Jew takes out water from the brunn, from the well, thank you, from the well. It takes out water from the well to give your animals, okay? Is it allowed to enjoy that water for your animals or not, okay? And then it says, in principle, they didn't change, the non-Jew didn't change the situation of the water, because you could theoretically take your animal down the well and the animal would drink down in the well and then take it up again. So in principle, the water was in your reach from before. The toilet paper is maybe the same. I had heard an answer saying that you're allowed to ask a non-Jew or hint a non-Jew to prepare the toilet paper for you, because you could use the toilet paper without tearing it apart. It's not comfortable. It will be weird, but in principle, I won't go into details. You could all imagine that it's possible to use the toilet paper without it. And in that way, the answer I heard, I'm not sure everyone will agree about it, but the idea of the halachic discussion is here, that if there is no change in this being able for you to use, but it's only a little more comfortable, then it's not the same as if a non-Jew made a whole melacha and changed the whole situation for you, okay? That's the toilet paper example is maybe good for that. Yes.
I do not think that one should call the goy into the toilet if you're stuck there, because you've forgotten your toilet paper. I think that there's enough, because of the various examples that have been given. If one were stuck and had no other solution, then through, you can not tear on the actual lines and tear in a different place and do it in a shinui, in a non-regular way. And because of the need and the disgrace, that would be allowed on Shabbat as well. That is brought down.
It will be very hard to add. It will be very hard to hint a non-Jew to prepare the toilet paper in the Shabbat way. So it's only if it's a non-Jew that knows and understands it. And then I agree, it's not about calling into, but sometimes also to take your nose, it's important. If you don't have tissues, you have to find a solution. And as Rav Moshe David says, disgrace of not be able to take your nose is a reason that goes very clear into the at least gray zone of, okay, by principle, we don't want to use non-Jews at all. In the clear situations of sickness, of a big loss, we're allowed to hint them to do, and sometimes allowed to tell them to do, okay? In the gray zones, if it's not breaking the Shabbat rules, or as we said, not changing the situation, there are situations where we're allowed to use a non-Jew, but I think the most important, we won't go to all the details now, but my message I think is important here is to understand that even if we have opening, and they have to have a good reason, and you have to do it in the correct way, they are the opening, and not, as unfortunately many Jews, even many very religious Jews think, because they haven't learned the details, that Shabbos goys mean I have a non-Jew at my home and they do everything for us. And unfortunately, I know many communities especially South America, they have muchachos at their homes. That is a way of living, that you have someone who is a helper or servant or something else that lives in your home 6 days a week. And for them, Shabbat is okay. The Shabbos guy does everything for us. And that goes against the rules, and of course, against the idea of only when there is very, very big need, we use the Shabbos guy. I don't know how much time we have, but I do want to use some more minutes to speak about other issues that are connected to Shabbos Goy. Maybe we won't go into all the details, but just to understand the complication and maybe the solution of these things. There are many things regarding to business. Okay, I have a shop, and I have a partner that is not Jewish, and we have a shop together. Should I demand that my shop will be closed on Shabbat because I'm Jewish and the non-Jew and the non-Jew can't open a shop that I'm enjoying on Shabbat because it's also mine. In some ways, there are ways to say that he enjoys the benefit of the Shabbat, and I will enjoy the benefit of a Wednesday. But it's important to do it in the correct way, because if I'm enjoying my shop open on Shabbat with non-Jews working there, I'm enjoying some work that was done for me on Shabbat, and that's not allowed. Okay, so only the way of doing it, I won't again go into all the details, but all that is important. Another issue is when I ask a non-Jew doing a work for me, is he allowed to do it on Shabbat or not? Okay, so example, for example, I want to fix my car. Okay, so I will go to a non-Jew, ask him to fix my car. Is he allowed to fix my Jewish car or Jewish-owned car? It's not a Jewish car, Jewish-owned car on Shabbat or not? And the answer will normally be that he is only allowed to do it if he has time to do it outside the Shabbat. Meaning, if I'll give the non-Jew my car 2 minutes before Shabbat, and I'll take it 5 minutes after Shabbat, then I'm actually asking the non-Jew to work on Shabbat for me. That's not allowed. If I'm giving him the car on one day and take it the Monday after, and he takes 10 hours to work on the car, and the non-Jew wants to work on my car on Shabbat because it's best for him, then he's not doing my work on Shabbat, but he's doing his work on Shabbat, because he can do it before Shabbat, but it's more convenient to him for doing Shabbat. I can't tell him you shouldn't do that on Shabbat. I can't tell him it's not allowed. The problem will be, for example, if he works in fixing my home. Okay, I have a big project in my home, building a new bathroom, and the one who wants to build my new bathroom has 2 weeks to do it. It takes only 3 days, let's say, like it takes more than that, I think, but let's say 3 days. They want to work in the weekends on the Shabbat. Is that allowed or not? And here's the problem will be, and it's the same in the shop, and it's the same in the car, and especially when a non-Jew does a work in your home. There is another problem in addition to, is it allowed regarding to does he do his own work or does he do your work? And the difference would be, how does it look? Not only is it allowed, but how does it look? Because even if I would ask a non-Jew to work in my home, and he does it in his own time, and he chooses to do it in Shabbat, people will go by and see, oh, Yoav is fixing his home in Shabbat. Oh, he asked non-Jews to do it. That means that non-Jews could do anything for Jews, because he has people working in his home fixing his bathroom on Shabbat. Or even saying, oh, it's allowed to fix your bathroom on Shabbat because I saw Yoav did that. So it's called what we call Mar'it Ain, how it looks. Or if I have a business and it's called Yoav and his friends, the name of the business. And I did, like in the paper, all the things correct, that the non-Jew that works on Shabbat, they will do it in a way that the profit won't go to me, but will go to my partners and so on. But all the people say that is the shop of Yoav, and that is open on a Shabbat. Then it's also a problem, even if we haven't broken the rules. And it's important to understand the difference between how could we have businesses with others, and it goes even into very small details. I want to buy stocks of a big company. How could I have stocks in a company that works on Shabbat? I get profit from their work on Shabbat. just to make things even more complicated, they sometimes could have Jews working on Shabbat. I can't control who they have working on Shabbat. So there are many questions here. I don't go into all the answers. There are many questions here. The principle will be, in all the things we spoke about when being together and on, is it possible that the work of a non-Jew on Shabbat will be for his own sake and not for my sake? Then it's maybe allowed or often allowed, but we also have to take in concern what we call marit ayin. How does that look from the outside? And I use it also to go back to the example that Lars took up with the public transportation. Okay, I could go on the bus, Yoav, and I will do everything correct. I'll have bought the ticket from advance. I'll put the ticket as a part of my belt so I don't bear it. I will go on the bus only if it opens the doors without me being close. And I'll go off the bus only in the place where the bus is stopping for others, and then I'll go off. So then I don't break anything. The driver doesn't do it for me. I don't bear anything. I do everything correct. But someone who will see me on the bus will say, oh, I saw Yoav using the bus on Shabbat, meaning it's allowed to use the bus on Shabbat. And he doesn't know all the small details of how I do it or not do it, to do it in a way that doesn't break the rules. And that will lead, maybe not me to break the Shabbat rules, but many others to break the Shabbat rules, because the understanding will be we're allowed to use public transportation on Shabbat because there is a non-Jewish driver. And people who don't know all the other details don't know that it's actually not a problem. And this issue of marit ayin is very important to take in concern, because it can change the whole frame of Shabbat, not only for ourselves, but for the environment around us. And that also is an important halachic issue that we have to take in concern. Yeah. I'll just come with another example. I don't like it so much, but the use of Shabbos go two more details. How are we with the time of Moshe David? Are we after time? I don't hear you.
Yes, we're after time. But if anyone would like to feel that
Maybe
I'll
yeah. Any questions or comments? It's okay to use some more minutes. There could be there are many examples in what we said. I will try to go through the principles here to understand the frame, understand that it's not allowed, but then in some issues it is allowed. But maybe just as I said, because it's allowed in so many issues, the clear things and the gray zone things, it made a problem, because many things people think that Shabbos Goy is allowed to do things on Shabbos for a Jew. And that's not correct. The principle is the opposite. He's not allowed, or he's allowed to do what he wants. We are not allowed to enjoy it or to ask him to do it But because we have so many examples and people see it, and people go to hotels in Israel, and they go to the dinner, and in the entrance you have a person standing with a paper saying, okay, Yoav, yes, okay, you're here, you can go in. So he taking a pen and he writes that I'm come to a dinner on Shabbat, and he's non-Jew, and that's allowed. How is that allowed? The rabbi of the hotel, and it's happening in all the hotels, or at least almost all the hotels, says he is able to check if I came in another way. You could have small papers with all the names and taking them out. You could put another kind of sign on the side of the paper that isn't writing. And by that, the rabbi says that why does a non-Jew in the entrance to the dinner write with the pen? He does it because it's more convenient for him, because he can check that I am in the hotel in a more complicated way. So it's more convenient for him. Then the writing on the paper is not for me, but is for him. And these are, you could discuss these issues, a very small issue that have to be checked everything for itself, understanding how the whole idea of Shabbat Goy should be always inside the frame of what we teach today, but is normally a big gray zone that is sometimes hard to understand.
I came to the shiur with a question that unfortunately you have not solved, which is the issue of normalization of the Shabbos Goy as we see it in the hotels, for example, that you just gave. And I cannot figure out how that is possible. How can you have an entire system which is set up for the pleasure of people, which is not necessary? I mean, you can have, and many times it's in more religious settings actually than in non-religious. You have a mashgiach, you have a rabbi there, you have a chazan there, a cantor for the Shabbat, and you have not one Shabbos Goy, you have 50 of them, and they're not just doing things to, they're who is actually making sure that they understand the concept. And I think that experience teaches us that this type of normalization just leads to losing the whole environment in itself. But it's nothing new, as was mentioned before. We used to have it in communities throughout Europe, in which you have someone. You had such a case. We had a Shabbos Goy in the synagogue in Malmö when I came there. That person has lost their job, unfortunately, because I don't like the idea of normalization. If you need something, you can have someone who is readily available for emergencies. But I think one other thing that just to add here is that it's actually nice in terms of education for ourselves and for our children when you don't try to solve things. If you have a Shabbos meal in the dark, then your kids will remember it for years because you didn't find the solution, and in a good way, because they'll remember that Shabbat was so important that we actually ate in the dark, but we ate cold food. So yes, you could find ways to find solutions all of the time, but I think the opposite is also the case, that respecting the Shabbat properly. So maybe we might be a bit uncomfortable in circumstances. Not speaking about life-threatening or being sick or something like that. So I'm sorry, Rav Joav.
I agree very much with what you said, because as you said, the Marit Ein, with the seeing of so many using of Shabbos Goy, and how easy it is, because that's okay, and that's not from the Torah, and then it's even be better. And finding these solutions has made it very as if that should be a first case scenario and not a last case scenario. And that's why it was important for me to start with saying the principle is that it's not allowed, not to tell you that everyone who uses Shabbos Goy is breaking the rules. I explained later why it's not breaking the rules in most of the cases. But the idea should be kol melacha lo ye'aseh. Any work shouldn't be done. And because of that, we have to prepare us for Shabbat before that we won't be needed ourselves or coming to these gray zones. There are situations it's not possible to solve it, and then we have to consider using it. But we should do everything we can not to come there, and to do what we can to find solutions not using non-Jews, because it changes the whole atmosphere on Shabbat, and it goes against the idea that was the idea in it from to begin with, that everything where we live is standing on Shabbat, and no one has to do anything, and not that the non-Jews would do for us. That's a really wrong way of turning the idea of the Shabbat from being something that the frame as it should be, to being something that, okay, the non-Jews are making it, as you said, Moshe David, convenient for those who keep the Shabbat. And it goes against what the Mechilta says, that the non-Jews shouldn't do for you. Okay, then we could go into the details and see that here is the thickness, and that's something. But when we go further down, and as much we use it, even if it's maybe allowed, it will be more normalized. And I agree with you, Rav Moshe David, about how problematic it is, and how we should try to avoid it. Besides the issues, if you don't have fire on and it's really, really freezing, And especially if you have children at home, or elderly at home, but even if not, it could make sickness. That is, but we have so many solutions for that today, so that won't be, and will be only if something happens, if electricity falls down in the whole area, I don't know, something like that, that you have to find a solution, and not that you prepare for it. Thank you for participation. Sorry, speaking for too much, and you didn't have maybe time to ask the questions and examples. And we'll meet next week, same time. Shavua Tov.
שבוע טוב,
Shabbat
תודה
tov
רבה.
to everyone.
שבוע טוב, יואב.
להתראות.
אחד.